Welcome to the Aesopians podcast, where the wisest in the channel come to get their MSP marketing insights. In today's episode, we're talking about Azure Cloud for MSPs and featuring Matt Hache. Welcome to the first episode of the Aesopians podcast. My name is Hunter Nelson. I'm here with Matt Hache from Pax8 and Neon Cobra. And today we're going to be talking about Azure Cloud and how MSPs can leverage selling Azure Cloud offerings to expand their revenues and grow their MSP. So welcome, Matt. Great to have you here today. And thank you for being volunteering to be the first guest on the podcast here.
Absolute pleasure. Gotta love jumping into something new, though.
Yeah. Um, so, start off by just kind of telling us a little bit about, more about who you are and what you do. I gave you a little kind of pre-warm up there, but
Sure.
just let's hear it from, you.
Yeah, no, that's great. So a little bit about myself. I'm, based in Southern Ontario, Canada. I've spent probably the better half of the last 12 to 15 years working in some capacity with the channel. Started as an MSP as a solutions architect and worked into project management and operations. In the last 4 years, moved to Pax8 as an infrastructure consultant that primarily focused on helping MSPs in the Canadian region adopt and be successful within an Azure practice, because those are mutually exclusive, surprisingly. You can take on the product and it can be an absolute disaster and you never touch it again. So there's a long path of education that comes with that. And through that vertical and avenue, Neon Cobra was spawned, a side project via education. What I had found in my time at Pax8 is that Microsoft does a tremendous job at trying to provide information that is suited for everybody, but their primary market tends to always land on the enterprise scope and space. And that's sometimes incredibly difficult for an MSP, especially when your focus is pulled 16 different ways to distill and understand what Microsoft wants you to know and how to do it successfully. So I spend my time on this kind of video podcast series tearing down and finding areas of focus that Microsoft not necessarily hides, but obscures among documentation for you to leverage and improve your overall Azure practice. And I also spend some of that time exploring channel, I hate the term influencers, but people that are important to the channel, right? I've had members like Matt Lee, Alex Farling, Bob Coppage, a lot of members that are very vocal in growing the industry in the right direction. And I'd like to take the time in this podcast series to talk about them and learn more about what makes them tick and why they are the way they are, so we can try to emulate and just be better. So that's kind of the side project on that side. And that's, I guess, the longest elevator pitch, 1,000-yard elevator pitch. So
Yeah, Azure does have a lot of great resources, and but it is still in a lot of ways, even though it's a major product, kind of like, you know, a startup and fast evolving product. So they almost don't have time to create the documentation or, appeal to all the audiences that are needed.
mhm.
So there's definitely needs for experts in both creating content to help MSPs leverage Azure, and then for MSPs to go and then help their customers leverage Azure to build their, technology solutions as well.
Mhm.
Um, and AI has really underscored the fast developing nature of like these cloud offerings. Quantum computing is kind of right behind that as well. So it's still a growing industry despite the we're in being in kind of like the post hype wave of the cloud.
Yeah, I know AI has definitely been dominating the conversation. It's caused a lot of problems, even just for creators like you and I, where you eventually start to be able to see the AI generated content, especially in text. So I think, a lot of the conversation, even from Microsoft with their Copilot product, is predominantly around the AI initiative. And it's sometimes very easy as an MSP to chase that shiny new thing. And there is value in that, right? There's a tremendous amount of value to be derived from products like Copilot. But I think to forget or give up fundamentals or learning about, what's going on the other side, like what's happening with cloud infrastructure and how you navigate that is still a very important thing. The catch 22 is a lot of times is I'll say, a partner or a client will be very interested in moving towards AI generated, workloads and wants to adopt the AI practice, but then you present Azure to them. It's like, oh, I don't want to do cloud. It's like, well, those are not mutually exclusive. By moving into Azure, you're closer to the tools and technologies that you're hoping to leverage, right? The shiny tools that you're pursuing. So a lot of the times we'll find that, they jump over to the AI stuff, completely neglecting the Azure side of things. And then they have to try to figure that out. And that's not a 1 day course. It is a change in sometimes your entire business practice, right? Even how you bill, how you collect. If you are used to doing projects and retiring a large capital expense every 5 years, and that's funding your organization, you have to forego that when you move to Azure. It becomes an operational side of the business, an operational expense, which if we draw back to MSPs 15, 20 years ago, that's your change from break fix to MSP. It's a very hard thing to do. It's your finance team's going to hate you because it changes how all that looks. Your MSA agreements sometimes need to be changed, but it gives you a almost greenfield to build a modern MSP practice. And it allows you to decouple from maybe some uh, chains in the past that maybe you're holding, like, maybe you've aligned yourself with certain vendors and things like that. The irony is not lost on me that we'd be aligning on Azure. But if we take even just Azure out of the equation, just cloud computing in general, if you're removing your reliance on large projects, capital expenditures, and things like that, and you move to an operational expense, you become much more profitable in the eyes of an M&A. You become much more stable as far as income and outcome, right? Uh, I think the biggest, to not go too far down this rabbit hole, but one of the biggest impacts we saw to a lot of organizations, specifically during COVID, and then that boat getting stuck in the Panama Canal and the entire supply chain shut down for like 8 months there. A lot of
Yeah.
organizations lost a lot of money because they couldn't close projects anymore. They couldn't get that $100,000 projects, and people were laid off. And some businesses had a real hard time with that. If you were in an operational model using cloud computing of some sort, that would have been a non-issue. At worst, you go to Best Buy or whatever and you buy a new laptop and just connect into your cloud infrastructure. Not the best way to go about it, but a way to work through that. So, to bring it all back, I think ignoring cloud because AI is the new thing, I think is the wrong way to go about this. I think adopting and really leaning into that where it makes sense, because not everything makes sense, right? If you have no internet, don't go cloud, right? It doesn't make sense for that. You've got very, very expensive workloads, unless you can sell on the value or of being decentralized, sometimes it doesn't make sense to go up there. Sometimes a hybrid approach is required. But, you know, the MSP journey, especially the SMB and the mid markets, right, that deal with the, let's say 30 and under users, you have to then value sell to your clients that look, the 5 year, $25,000 server is a thing of the past. We need to keep up with the times. You need to invest in your technology. And the more you invest within reason, there's a multiplier that comes out on the other side. Right. And then allows you to focus on what makes you money as opposed to figuring out, how much money you need to save to do the next thing. So
Yeah, and moving to the cloud comes with like, a number of other benefits with simplified compliance and
mhm.
resiliency and things like that that may not come out of the box, baked in with just having like on-premise servers.
Yeah.
So, you're intrinsically doing things better in certain ways, for your customers when you have like cloud infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but you kind of mentioned some of the pushback of MSPs trying to, modernize their business and trying to steer away from, doing more cloud work. And I've encountered a little bit of that as well,
Mhm.
with regards to thinking about kind of a content strategy for MSPs. I'm trying to evangelize and, talk to MSPs about having to get a little bit more specific with their content marketing in a lot of
Mhm.
cases because this is a problem solution driven industry. People are searching for help with their specific problems. The way that they discover MSPs is not always searching specifically for an MSP. It's to solve a
Hmm.
specific problem. Um, so, just looking at search engine traffic and reading industry reports about the growth rates of cloud infrastructure compared to on-premise infrastructure,
Hmm.
I've kind of gone through this, exercise and conversation talking with MSPs about getting a little bit more purposeful with creating, cloud content around Azure. And that's typically gets a lot of pushback because that requires project work, or like you said,
Yeah.
maybe some changes to the business that aren't, it's hard work.
Yeah.
So, but I guess could you speak a little bit to whether the juice is worth the squeeze? What are you seeing in terms of the MSPs that have kind of navigated that journey
Right.
and, gone on a little bit more all in on the cloud and, made those changes? Like, what is the revenue opportunity? What is the, ease of marketing, anything like that?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a very complex question, right? If we look at some of the risks in play, if in the past you were selling one brand of server and then you realigned your entire stack to another brand of servers, your general deployment strategy doesn't change, right? Maybe where you plug your cards in and stuff like that might be the change in approach. When you start moving to cloud, some of this stuff stays the same, right? You're still likely working within Windows operating systems, but then there's a redesign within your team from a training and education standpoint that needs to occur. And this can be a very big upfront investment with a lot of unknowns. Like if you're not pushing the product and you're getting ready, a lot of times it's not ever going to come through. We're like, oh, go get your Azure certifications, we'll get you primed, and then we'll start selling it. My general recommendation is, don't wait. Start talking about it, because if you're not talking about it, your clients are already looking for it. Not to quote Rob Ray, but he does an amazing presentation on what the next generation of business owners do when they want to buy products. I would say probably even as far as like 10 years ago, if there was an IT decision to be made, they likely would message their account manager at their local MSP, say, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. Or they'd wait for like a VCIO meeting or something like that. Now, what tends to happen is they go to Google, right? They go to ChatGPT, they go to Bing, maybe, and they Google, best in class blank. And whoever has the better marketing engine at that time is going to be what lands in their radar, and they'll do the reviews. And then a lot of times they will come to you and ask, hey, I want this. It's almost kind of a test of like, what do you know? So, when we're talking about the marketing side of things, sometimes you need to be bringing this technology to them before they even know they need it, just to plant the seed. So when it does come back around in their automated feeds or their Instagrams or whatever on their phones, because they said the word cloud computing in front of their phone 5 times, they will remember that you brought that to them. The other side of that is Microsoft is a behemoth and they are advertising constantly, right? You will watch Super Bowl sporting events, and Microsoft will have a Copilot commercial that runs. And like that's wild to me. Like for the longest time, the IT industry was like, we're our own shell, and like we don't break out of it. We don't talk too much about our product. Don't worry about, this AV and this EDR and what this means. We got you. But now they are leaving the comfort of the MSP, and the internet is at their fingers, and they can see, this is product that is, they'll know about the CrowdStrike problems. They'll know about previous hacks for LastPass. So when you're, and they don't care about the remediation and what has been done, and they could be top right quadrant again, but they've been poisoned. So as an MSP, I would say aligning with value and aligning with, results is the way you should be going. Because if you need to make a pivot internally to say change EDR softwares, you can do that. And it's not going to undercut all your previous marketing material. So from the marketing side, be proactive, talk about this, talk about successes you've done for other one of your clients, even if you haven't done it and full capacity. If you know of partners or other organizations that have success, speak to those successes. From the back end for preparation, make sure you have aligned resources, right? whether, put on my Pax8 hat or whatever the case is, make sure you have got consultants, make sure you've got people you can bring in ad hoc to help fill in while your organization spins up. The general time I see an organization go from zero Azure to a major Azure practice, even adopting it in its entirety, like they dove in, it's easily 8 months to a year before they start to feel comfortable within there because there's all these little things. So yeah, you can go buy Azure from anybody, but make sure you've got the safety nets, make sure you got the people to talk to on that one. And you can do that for free a lot of times. You can find people that'll support you on the back end to get you started. And then when you finally land that sale, you know your mechanisms, you know where to go, and then you have skin in the game, you start training your staff up. So that'd be my approach to do that if you're going to try to dip your toe in, right? You don't want to rock your whole world, but start having conversations early with your clients. And then when you get a bite, you know exactly what to do to action that lead. It's not a scramble. Because I get a lot of partners coming to me like, my clients asked what the cloud option looks like, and I don't know what to do, which means they didn't even present it. They want to know what the cloud option is. Sometimes it sells itself.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you know if like I'm curious, does Pax8 or do you know of any other organizations that kind of have like white labelable support options for streamlining that transition process and offering kind of cloud services without hiring people directly or employing contractors? Because I know there's like vendors in the space that will like offer like white label SOC stuff to help you like bring a cybersecurity offering to market. Does Pax8 or any other organizations offer like that white label um, you know sort of cloud support?
Yeah. So like I think most distributors in some capacity have, whether in-house or external. I know from experience, Pax8, we have an internal pro services team that will deploy, right? We will white label a project for you. We will help you through funding initiatives as well. That tends to be a big thing as well. Microsoft gives a lot of money to Azure partners to move from on-prem to cloud, especially if you're looking to move like maybe one of your own self-hosted data centers. You can get additional incentives and rebates and just cash payments from Microsoft, depending on scope and scale. So when I talk about aligning with a partner, it's sometimes more than just like what margin can I get on the back end. It's this surrounding net that they provide you. So again, speaking from personal experience, we'd have professional services teams. We've got support staff that'll deal with general Azure problems. And then we've got third-party services we can refer to either extend help desk, provide, break fix support and things like that in a paid engagement. And while, sometimes people are like, oh, paid engagement, but if you're approaching Azure in a profitable fashion, and that's a conversation that I don't think we can have on, like it's a whole strategy to get around, but there's a way to approach Azure in a profitable fashion that's not just trying to retire your percentage in margin, but you can factor in, every time you have to call for maybe an enhanced problem or an enhanced ticket. And this is nothing new, right? Like if you're doing on-premise servers right now, you have to hop into the Microsoft support queue and hope you talk to somebody in the next 3 weeks, right? You can find, Azure expert MSPs out there that do not compete with you, that will do breaks fix engagements, consulting engagements, even like help desk enhancements. These teams exist out there. And if you can, backfill essentially your bench or your roster, very small MSPs can make large sweeping changes to their business model and really their profitability levels by, just finding these sources as they start to scale up. Because the reality is the cost to keep an Azure solutions architect or engineer on your back bench is very expensive. And unless your whole business surrounds Azure, you're going to hire a $200,000 or $300,000 a year Azure solutions architect for a 15 user client. Probably not. Right? Like, no, there's no reason to, right? So you skill up your staff as they start to get exposed to it. You kind of put guardrails on with like products like Nerdio and proper best practices, education from distributors and marketplace partners that can help you with this stuff. Right? It's a journey. But on the other side of that is essentially a full like an 80% fully operational expensed organization. You don't have to worry about CapEx ingestions. You can be agile. You can provide best in class services. You can pivot on a dime. And then from an M&A perspective, if you decide to sell your organization, you can easily, you have very little tech debt on the way out, right? They're not investing or inheriting like 2008 boxes or things like that. You're on a modern infrastructure with modern security, likely established SOPs and documentation and everything around that. So like that is the maturity level jump. I feel Azure pulls people into that maturity level enhancement, just kicking and screaming.
Yeah, kind of from my perspective, I see a lot of MSPs, or I work with a lot of MSPs that are in kind of that 2 million ARR range, 1 to 2 million ARR range. They kind of bootstrapped to that point off of networking and referrals, and they're trying to get a sustainable like lead volume or like pipeline that is a little bit like larger customer size. Because
Mhm.
once they get to that size, they also tend to get a little bit pickier with like can't do any more 10 user firms. They want to have like 20 user minimum.
Yeah.
They just want bigger and higher quality customers. And one of the reasons I've been kind of such an advocate of the cloud is that like if you start generating leads from people that are looking for cloud services, you're
Mhm.
intrinsically self-selecting better customers that have, higher operational maturity, which allows you to ride the wave of, their success for your MSP as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'll see this a lot of times. So like I have a lot of like one man, two man shop partners that I'll work with, and they can be very successful in Azure, but they're not also targeting one man, two man shops. They are using the multiplier effect of like I can provide you best in class like servers and hardware. If we take it back, even just from a physical aspect, if I'm a one man shop, if I was going to start my MSB today, I probably would not establish a hardware offering, right? I'll sell you laptops and that's fine. I'll drop ship them to your door, Surface Books, whatever, but I'm not going to get involved in servers unless I absolutely have to. Because if I look at it even just from a physical standpoint, it's recommended two people to rack a server, right? If I'm a one man shop, what am I having the client help me rack a server at this point? Or am I throwing my body at it to, put my back out kind of thing? This becomes a big problem for me because now if there's an on-site outage, I have to drop everything I'm doing and drive, which means my geographic area is limited. If I'm a cloud provider, the world's my oyster. However late, however early I want to work, I can follow the sun, and 95% of what I need to do for the organization can go from my computer in my basement. And then maybe the 5% on site, depending on scope and scale and what I've designed. Maybe I have boots on the ground I can source from contract work. Maybe I say, look, pull the other laptop out of the closet and log in with your credentials. Everything's in the cloud. Drop ship this laptop back to me, or I'll be there in a couple of days. I'm in the area. And then business moves forward. I am now highly profitable and not tied to physical assets and hardware. Now, there are obviously some limitations and concerns around this, but were I to approach the industry in this case, I would be very select at cloud only, cloud based. My overall risk portfolio and everything would be reduced greatly. The biggest problem is the people trying to get, from the on-prem boots on the ground to the growth. So if you're talking like in regards to your 2 million ARR, that is probably one of the harder jumps to make it through because that's where you start to split yourself off as potentially a sysadmin or a tech, and you start to become the CEO of the organization. You probably hire, someone like a president to look after the sales cycle. You start to have silos develop in your organization, and those all require cash investments. So back to my operational versus capital expenditure, are you going to hire your first salesperson when you land $100,000 and hope that profit from that project pays and you land the next one? Or if you're in an operational mode, you land a $5,000 a month MRR, recurring revenue with a profitability of 50 to 60%, that's a salary. You can directly correlate that. That's a salary. You bring someone on right away, right? So you get ramping, you get your agility to move forward, and then you expand your market, right? If you are, predominantly lower GTA or, lower Southern Ontario, we've got a massive expanse to drive over. Like I used to have to drive 2.5 hours to get to a site sometimes. That's a quarter of my workday just on the road and then a quarter back, right? if you no longer have to do that, you can now start servicing people outside of your geographic region, which means your pool of candidates have increased. And you can partner with other organizations of similar mindsets and collectively grow both of your regions, right? As you prop each other up without competing. So I think the adoption of cloud in any fashion and the move to that sort of approach to business, I think is very, very healthy if you can navigate it and do it right.
Yeah, and then you can get a little bit more purposeful with zeroing in on problems of specific verticals. Once you kind of get out of the,
Ideal
confines of a
clients, yeah.
specific geographic area. Um,
hmm
do you have any kind of insight into some of the, common sort of projects or, entry points that MSPs are using to kind of land and expand with regard to cloud projects?
Yeah, so actually one of the fastest adopting, at least in my experience here in Canada, has been accounting firms, right? So accounting firms, which is odd because predominantly they're the ones that like also watch the money the hardest because they it's what they do. But what we found, a lot of those organizations very much relied on the elasticity of the cloud. That thing that Microsoft always said, or really any cloud providers, go into the cloud, it's elastic. You only pay for what you use. On paper sounds great, but the reality is no one turned everything off. Everyone left it the way it was. So a lot of adoption, I would see, organizations adopt products like Nerdio Manager that like took care of a lot of the automation and the um, uh, kind of put the guardrails on in Azure so you didn't gutterball your organization by spinning something up that was too expensive. It really helped protect the organization. But what it allowed it to do was create a scalable model for these organizations. And then when you go to an accounting firm that, from January to July is 4x their staff, and then after that goes back 100%, to like maybe 10 users, you don't have to sell them on a $50,000 server and try to plan what their next 5 years of elastic capacity is. You just sell
Mm,
them on scalability. And it clicked. It made sense for these organizations, right? We scale in, we scale out, we pay for what we need, and it became directly translatable to what their fees were. The other
yeah, that's
shocking one
awesome.
I saw, which I probably wouldn't have accounted for, but like I was happy to be proven wrong, was law firms. Because again, another predominant, like we've been doing it on paper, we don't need it anymore. But there's kind of a ripple or a shift in the industry where security is, front and center for them right now. And they realize their 15-year-old server that like they have to close the door because it's too loud was a liability and a risk they didn't want to deal with anymore. And they were able to then start moving to newer product stacks, newer product lines, and then adopt cloud. So those are kind of two of the fastest ones I would see accelerating. Um, Anything that has compliancy, security, high sensitive documentation, things like that, I see adoptions because, sensitivity labeling, data protection, all that stuff, and the ability then to extend across and manage everything centrally, I think was a big thing for a lot of organizations. So that's kind of the first ones. I would say from the
Yes.
harder ones to move up, it's going to be generally anyone, and this is starting to change, but generally anyone with large quantities of data, right? The one thing I found on premise is like you can go buy a 16 terabyte Western Digital Red for like $400 now, right? It's nothing. And you can even like build massive arrays and everything and like break ROI on that versus a cloud adoption within, like 6 to 8 months. Is it secure? Is it easy to get to? Maybe, but like when you're talking like an ROI of 8 months, it's really hard to fight that. We are seeing some changes in Azure, so it's become a little more cost effective. So if that's all you're moving up, it's very difficult. If that's part of what you're moving up, the conversation becomes value, becomes easier. And then the last one that I find a little difficult to move up, but I have some examples, is like graphic designers and high GPU intensive workloads.
Mm,
Um, there's a tremendous amount of value and options in there for Azure, but predominantly a lot of the ones I've been in, it's like an engineering firm with two engineers. And it's like, look, we'll buy that $5,000 PC for them and they can, work in the corner. And that's it. To put it up into the cloud, the ROI, if they have nothing else to kind of absorb the fees or kind of spread it out, it becomes a very hard pill to swallow because, it'll be like 10 months. They could have just bought another laptop. So, but yeah,
mm.
most organizations have the ability, right? It just depends on what their journey looks like a lot of times.
What about like SaaS startups or more software oriented companies? Because I know
Hmm.
like one of the kind of compelling, value props of the cloud from, my perspective is that it's just the, elasticity or like, pay as you go sort of thing makes it a lot easier to bootstrap the development and getting like a software product online and kind of
Right.
bringing that to market. Um,
That's always a very interesting one because, like, the marketing collateral, the sales side of that, I mean, like, yeah, just pay for what you need, go. But the general human behavior is likely the people doing the DevOps and the design probably aren't the ones watching the bill run up. So
mm.
they don't turn things off sometimes, and it's a tale as old as time. You'll see like we moved from cloud back on premise and saved like $1 million a year. It's like, yeah, but like, what'd you leave on? It's like, oh, it turns out our devs just like built a bunch of stuff and went home for the weekend, right? You'll find a lot of times, unless they have really forward planned, a lot of these startups are just doing it on their gaming PCs and then maybe compiling some things and testing it, and then they go to scale, right? So they will buy old hardware and run it in their closet. So where you have that possibility, it's great. When you've adopted tools like AWS and their design stack, Azure and their GitHub, their Azure DevOps, there's a lot of product tools built into that, but it takes some time and investment a lot of times. And then they will likely just do their own open source stuff or stuff local instead. For them, it's just easier just to start that way. Complete aside, and also really interesting shift in the market. And this is an interesting thing that I've observed that Google has done. They did the long play. I would say the last 15 years worth of students coming out of the education system right now, all they know is Google because they were provided Chromebooks and G Suite accounts, everything like that. So when they enter the marketplace right now, their instant thought is like, where's my G Suites? Where's my Google? Where's this? They probably never really work with Excel spreadsheets and Word like, the previous generation, right? What I grew up with was Excel spreadsheets, Word documents. So when they enter the organization, the marketplace, they're generally tied to like Google Suites and Google Docs, and they don't care who they align with anymore. And then you have to rip them into Azure or rip them into AWS because they were doing things in a decentralized fashion. So to
Yeah, it's
to bring it,
interesting how like Microsoft has such deep penetration in like corporate America,
yeah,
but like outside of like kind of corporate, America, Google is definitely the predominant like
yeah,
Google Workspace is far more popular for
it was
contractors,
free.
small businesses, marketing teams, things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
When you need the baseline stuff, I'm not doing crazy macro pivot tables and things like that. I just need an Excel spreadsheet to summarize columns. Like Google Sheets is amazing for that. It just does what you need to do. It was really good on the collaboration side. I think the biggest problem for Microsoft is the barrier to entry for the longest time is I had to buy Office for $100, right? So like people stayed on 2007 for like 15 years and became a security risk. And G Suite's like, yeah, you can just have it. It's fine. There you go. And they essentially built themselves a market slice with that. But a little
Yeah,
bit of a tangent, but yeah, yeah.
yeah, I think it's like way easier to kind of collaborate on documents too for, whatever reason. But yeah, a little bit of a
Yeah,
tangent.
yeah. And it's the way they force kind of that stuff, right? Like there is no physical infrastructure for G Suite, right? Like you can do GCP, but then you're just doing Windows servers, right? But
Mm.
because everything is hosted in, you can do it with Microsoft, but it has to be in SharePoint, right? It's got to be in OneDrive, the collaboration tool. If it's not there, which most organizations maybe haven't adopted that yet, it's sitting on a traditional file server in a box in a corner somewhere, does not have those collaboration tools. So when you're holding it up against technology that was developed like 30 years ago, yeah, it looks like it's in the future. Microsoft has that. Just are you there? Are you using it kind of thing? So,
Mm. Okay. Well, is there anything that I didn't ask you today that you wanted to share with the audience?
best thing I'd say, if you're looking, don't ignore it. I've had some conversations with partners and clients essentially being like, we're never going to touch the cloud. I don't believe in it. And, you need to be aware and you need to have it at the very least as an option in your quiver. Because if you deny a client something because you're not comfortable with it, they will look elsewhere. And, as much as I'm an advocate of saying your Azure practice can be very profitable, Your bread and butter is your service agreements, right? A majority of your margin is likely coming from your managed service agreements. Azure and cloud computing in general allows you to blend those margins to increase levels of profitability. But if you're going to put your service agreement at risk just to stay in your comfort zone, you're likely to lose clients, right? Especially if they have somebody else that 100% will do it for them, and that's how they get their foot in the door, right? So have a contingency plan, have a way to approach it, have a way to go to market, even if you're not ready to do it yet. Understand what your options are.
Yeah, and I think there might be, some upcoming pressure on MSPs to, get a little bit more involved in the cloud just because of this AI and kind of the importance of machine learning and just having like an owned data repository. Because,
Hmm.
there was kind of the sentiment of like oil or data being the new oil, data being the
Yeah.
black gold. Um, and with AI kind of becoming more popular and companies leveraging their own data to create AI models and tune AI models and build more automation into their businesses, that's going
Hmm.
to be something that requires having more integrated and integratable like infrastructure that can be more
Yeah.
flexible because a lot of companies are just trying to figure this stuff out, and a lot of these GPUs and kind of AI computing infrastructure is really more accessible in the cloud than it is to stand up on-premise infrastructure to support
Yeah.
those sorts of initiatives. So are you seeing anything like that as far as MSPs seeing pressure to help their customers with adopting AI and standing up some of these models?
Yeah, so when we're chasing the shiny coin that is AI right now, which, there's tremendous value in that, but there's also tremendous risk, right? Like to your point of, the data, like data sanitization and aggregation is very, very important because AI sees all and doesn't discriminate, right? Um, so what we're seeing kind of enter the market quite often is, new products that leverage or their own AI or own LLMs or whatever the case is. And the conversation might be, well, I'm afraid to go and choose a vendor of my choice. What if the best AI engine or whatever product I decide to align on is, you know, better in AWS, and there's this kind of paralysis to move. My general comment to that is Microsoft is one of the leading in AI right now, right? Their collaboration with OpenAI and what they've done and with their Copilot puts them at the forefront. Now, whether you're ready to adopt that or not, the cloud computing side of that and the elasticity is going to be what's important to you. If you decide not to move to Azure out of concerns that you're maybe not ready, so you buy another server and stay on prem for 5 years, in 2 years' time, if you decide you want to do a new line of business, what do you do? Do you take your sunk cost in the physical architecture and then move at that point, or do you buy another server to run whatever product you just bought? If you're in a cloud computing environment, you spin up and spin down your requirements. You can run tests for fractions of the cost without having to invest in hardware and architecture. So your options are much, much larger than they would be if you just kind of stuck with what you're familiar with, waiting for the solution for you. So if you have any interest in AI, start with the foundation of everything else. Make sure your data is clean. Make sure it's been, sanitized, secured, right? Because again, you can buy a hard drive for $400 and store 25 years worth of documents. Who cares? Well, it costs money to do that in Azure. So pay attention to what you're looking at. Look at your data estate, modernize it, bring it up in Azure. And even if you don't touch AI for another couple of years, you are sitting prepared to action it when it is relevant and when it'll probably have the most impact to your business.
Yeah, and I'm kind of glad you mentioned that because, when you were talking earlier about how companies having the, best marketing at the time were kind of winning, the use case that popped into my mind earlier was just that a lot of companies will start out having a lot of their data in SharePoint and then exceed the size of what a
Mhm.
SharePoint site can
Yeah.
hold, and then they're looking for whatever the next data storage solution is. So, companies that can, say like, oh, you need blob storage versus a data lake versus, data warehousing, and just
Mhm.
being able to educate, consumers on what the options are at the time. If, your MSP can provide that versus another MSP that cannot, that's a good
Mhm.
way to unseat, a customer from an existing MSP, which
Yep.
as you move up market, you're almost exclusively unseating, customers from other MSPs rather than,
Yep.
finding people who are just becoming aware or, have put off working with an MSP for however long.
That's it, right? So you start swimming in the same oceans when you start getting to those, 50 users, 100 users. They maybe have one internal IT, and that's who you're trying to, and it's just like, however many of those are left. Eventually, that IT person ages out, or, it is identified as a risk to the organization, and they enter the market looking for MSPs. But predominantly, you're going to be competing against pre-existing MSPs in your market segments. So how do you differentiate that, right? You don't necessarily want to be bleeding edge, but you want to be leading edge. You want to be able to speak to things that might be important to them, things like fabric architecture and the AI that comes around that, even from a surface level, just understanding what is out there and be able to speak to it intelligently. And then when you pull a lead out of this, be like, oh, you have a large data project coming down the line. Who are you working with? Let me see if we can solve this for you. Because if that's how you win business a lot of times is you do something that the other person can't. And oh, while you're here, can you look at our systems? Right. And then suddenly you're the new MSP because you knew how to do Fabric, right? And Azure. So don't chase every shiny coin, but know what shiny coins are out there because you need to be able to speak to them in some capacity and then have essentially a course of action or way to approach. Even if you're a one man, two-man shop, establish a network of MSPs you trust, right? It's what we did at my MSP. We had organizations that, if it didn't fit our client profile, we knew exactly who to send them to. And if we sent them 10 and they sent us one, it didn't matter. We kept it in our region and we kept it within trusted, and then that's how we grew, was just creating a trusted web. So, learn what you can, focus where it matters, know what's out there.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt, for joining us on the podcast today. It
Yeah.
was really a pleasure to be able to chat with you for a minute, and we'll go ahead and wrap things up here.
Thank you so
Again,
much.
thank you. Any last, comments?
Like I mentioned, I release weekly videos surrounding Azure. I try to keep them to like 2 to 5 minutes at most. I realize time's sensitive. So, I'm not going to have you sit through a 30-minute demo of a product you don't care about. But, knowing what shiny coins out there is important. So if you're interested in getting started with an Azure practice, check out my channel, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to help.
Yep, check out Neon Cobra. We'll link Matt's website and channel and LinkedIn in the show notes. So be sure to check that out after the show. All right. Thanks again, and we'll wrap it up here. Thanks for listening. Hope you liked the episode. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe because we'll have new episodes featuring all sorts of exciting new guests on the way. I'm Hunter Nelson with Tortoise and Hare Software, and thank you for watching.